Rain hammered the marble entrance of the Carter Grand on a cold Manhattan night. A man in a worn coat stepped through the revolving door, holding a wilted bouquet and a frayed backpack. He asked for a single room. The receptionist looked him up and down, then smiled coldly. "We don't have anything available for someone like you." Behind him, a wealthy couple was handed the keys to the presidential suite without a word. He didn't argue. He didn't leave, because no one in that lobby knew who he really was. The rain had not let up since dusk. Michael Carter stood beneath the gold-lit awning of the Carter Grand, watching the water trace thin rivers across the marble steps. He had not been inside this lobby in nearly 6 years, and the building looked exactly as he remembered, exactly as Anna had imagined it the night they sketched the entrance on the back of a diner napkin in 1998. The brass detailing she had insisted on, the warm, low ceiling she said would make strangers feel like they were coming home. He adjusted the strap of his frayed backpack and stepped through the revolving door. Inside, the lobby breathed money. Crystal chandeliers hung over polished stone, and the soft murmur of well-dressed guests filled the room like background music. A pianist played something slow near the far wall. Michael walked with the unhurried weight of a man who had been somewhere quieter for too long, the bouquet in his hand drooping from the cold. The flowers were lilies, white ones, the kind Anna had carried at their wedding. Tonight would have been her 52nd birthday, and he had promised her, the year she got sick, that he would bring her favorite flowers back to the place she loved most. He had spent the last several years away from the company, away from the boardroom, away from anything that bore his name. After Anna's funeral, he had handed the day-to-day operations to a regional team and disappeared into a small house in Vermont, surrounded by trees and silence. Tonight was the first time he had returned to the city, and he had come quietly, deliberately in an old wool coat she had bought him one Christmas. He did not want to be greeted. He did not want a welcome. He only wanted a single room one night and a moment alone with her memory. The receptionist behind the front desk did not look up when he approached. Her name tag read, Jessica Moore, and she was scrolling through something on the screen with a faintly bored expression. Behind her, on the wall above the key cabinet, hung a framed photograph that Michael recognized without needing to lift his eyes. He had taken that photograph himself. Anna stood in front of the building on the day of its grand opening, holding a pair of golden scissors, smiling so widely her shoulders had risen. He cleared his throat once gently. "Good evening. I'd like a room for the night, please. Anything you have available is fine." Jessica looked up. Her eyes traveled from his face to his coat, to the wilted bouquet, to the worn canvas of the backpack at his feet. Her expression shifted in the small, practiced way that hotel staff sometimes shift when they have decided, without saying it, that a person does not belong. She set down her pen with a soft click against the marble counter and gave him a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked tonight." Michael nodded slowly. He glanced at the screen behind the counter where the booking system clearly showed several rooms still available, the green markers visible from where he was standing. He did not point this out. He simply asked, "Are you certain I can pay in advance? Cash or card, whichever you prefer." She tilted her head, the smile thinning. "Sir, the Carter Grand is a 5-star establishment. Our rates start at $700 a night. I'm not sure that's something you were expecting." Her voice was soft enough to sound polite, but loud enough that the couple standing 2 paces behind Michael could hear every word. He felt the brief pause in conversation behind him, the tilt of strangers' attention. He did not turn around. Before he could answer, the revolving door turned again, and a couple swept in on a wave of cold air and laughter. The man wore a dark camel overcoat that probably cost more than most people earned in a month, and the woman, blonde and tall, carried a small designer handbag like it weighed nothing. They walked straight past Michael without seeing him, the way certain people walk past doormen and waiters, and anyone they have decided is furniture. Jessica's posture changed instantly. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, welcome back. We have the presidential suite ready for you just as you requested." Her voice had warmed by 10 degrees. She slid a leather folder across the counter, smiling now with her whole face. Daniel Whitmore signed without reading. Vanessa beside him did not even glance at Michael as she leaned against the counter, her perfume sharp and floral. Within 90 seconds, the keys to the highest suite in the building were in their hands, and they were being escorted toward the private elevator by a bellboy in a crisp navy uniform. Michael stood where he was. The flowers in his hand felt heavier. He waited until the couple had disappeared, then turned back to Jessica with the same quiet voice he had used at the start. "I see you do have rooms available. I'd just like a standard one. That's all I'm asking for." Her smile when it returned was colder than the rain outside. "Sir, I've already told you, there's nothing available for you tonight." She emphasized the last 2 words, just enough to make the meaning unmistakable, then reached for the phone beside her register, the gesture small but loaded. "If you'd like, I can recommend a property a few blocks east that might be more suitable for your budget." Across the lobby, a few of the seated guests had begun to glance over. A woman in a velvet dress lowered her glass of wine. A man near the fireplace folded his newspaper. The pianist played on, but the air had changed in that subtle way air changes when people sense conflict and pretend they do not. Michael felt the heat rise to the back of his neck, not from anger, but from something older and quieter. He thought of Anna. He thought of the way she used to walk these halls, stopping to learn the names of the cleaning staff, asking about their children, remembering them the next time she came in. He could leave. That was the simple choice, the easy one. He could turn around, walk back out through the revolving door, find a smaller hotel a few streets down where no one would look at his coat, and spend the night the way he had planned, alone with a glass of water and the photograph of his wife he carried in his backpack. No one in this building would ever know who had walked through their lobby tonight. The lesson, if there was one, would die in the rain outside. And tomorrow, the staff at the front desk would treat the next tired stranger exactly the same way. Or he could stay. He could stay and let the moment unfold, let it run its course, and see how far it would go before someone, anyone in this building, remembered the standard Anna had spent her life trying to build. He had not come here to test them. He had come to mourn. But mourning, he realized now, was not just about flowers and silence. It was about honoring what the dead had stood for, even when no one was watching. Michael set the bouquet gently on the counter. Lilies. First, the way Anna used to arrange them at home. He looked Jessica in the eye, his voice still soft. Still the voice of a man who had been polite all his life, because his wife had asked him to be. "I'd like to speak with your manager, please." Jessica's smile flickered just for a second, and then it sharpened into something else. She picked up the phone without breaking eye contact. "Of course, sir. I'll call him right now." Behind her, the photograph of Anna Carter watched the lobby in silence, the gold scissors in her hand, catching the chandelier light, and somewhere on the upper floors, a manager named Richard Hale was about to be summoned downstairs to handle a problem he did not yet understand. Richard Hale arrived from the elevator with the brisk pace of a man who had been pulled away from something he considered more important. He was tall, sharply dressed, his tie perfectly knotted even at this hour, and he scanned the lobby once before locking onto Michael with the practiced confidence of someone who had handled many situations before. He did not introduce himself. He simply walked behind the counter, leaned toward Jessica for a quiet word, then looked Michael over from across the marble. "Sir, I'm the general manager. I understand you've been asking about a room." His voice was smooth, professional, the kind of voice trained to sound polite while saying no. "Unfortunately, my receptionist is correct. We have a particular standard at the Carter Grand, and our availability tonight is reserved for guests with prior arrangements." He glanced down at the lilies still resting on the counter, then back up. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere." Michael did not move. He noticed how Richard's eyes lingered on the worn cuffs of the coat on the canvas backpack against his leg, and how those small visual details were being added together in Richard's mind into a single conclusion. He had seen that calculation before, years ago, in different rooms. It always looked the same. I asked for a standard room. Michael said, his voice unchanged from before. I have the means to pay. I won't ask for a discount, and I have no interest in special treatment. All I want is the service this hotel openly advertises. He gestured slightly toward the booking screen Jessica had angled away from him. There are rooms available. I can see them from here. Richard's expression hardened just enough to lose its polish. A young bellboy carrying a brass luggage cart paused near the lounge watching the exchange. His name tag read, Ethan Brooks, and he was new enough to still feel the lobby as a room rather than a workplace. He saw the older man's drooping flowers. He saw the worn coat. He also saw the way the man stood without raising his voice, without raising his hands, without raising anything at all, and something in Ethan's chest tightened in a way he could not yet name. He gripped the cart handle and stayed where he was listening. Richard's voice dropped into a tone that pretended to be reasonable. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you one more time to leave the premises. We have other guests to attend to, and your continued presence is becoming a disturbance. He lifted a hand toward the far wall where 2 security officers in dark suits had already begun walking over from their post by the entrance. They were big men, calm, well-trained, and their approach drew every remaining eye in the lobby toward Michael like iron toward a magnet. The pianist's playing thinned and then stopped altogether. A woman in the lounge area lifted her phone and tilted it discreetly in Michael's direction, the small red dot of a recording light blinking awake. A businessman near the bar did the same. Within seconds, half a dozen phones had appeared, each held at the careful angle people use when they want to film something without being seen filming it. The lobby's hush had a different texture, now sharper, more curious, more cruel. Michael felt the temperature of the room change around him. He had spent the early years of his life in rooms exactly like this, when he and Anna were still scraping together loans and convincing investors that 2 unknowns from a small town could build something extraordinary. He had been looked at this way before in those days. He had learned that the only response was to remain still, to let the moment expose whoever was rushing to judge. He let his hands rest at his sides. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. A few of the watching guests began to whisper. One of them, a silver-haired woman seated near the fireplace, set down her glass and frowned openly at Richard. He hasn't done anything wrong, she said loud enough to carry. He just asked for a room. Beside her, a man in a tweed jacket nodded slowly. His arms crossed, but not everyone agreed. Closer to the elevator, a younger couple murmured to each other about how people like that always tried to push their way into places they did not belong, and the woman gave Michael a thin, satisfied glance before turning her back. The lobby had divided itself quietly into 2 halves. On one side, the half that wanted to see a stranger humiliated and removed. On the other, the half that had begun to suspect, in the way that human instinct sometimes outruns explanation, that something was wrong about this picture. Ethan Brooks stood between them with the luggage cart gripping the handle so hard his knuckles whitened. He looked at the photograph of Anna Carter hanging above the key cabinet, the one he walked past every day without truly seeing. Then he looked back at the older man standing alone before the counter. Michael carried something Ethan had no word for, a kind of quiet weight that did not belong to anyone Richard or Jessica had decided he was. The same kind of weight that lived in the photograph behind the desk, in the way Anna stood holding the gold scissors, calm and certain, in a room full of strangers. Ethan could not have explained it if he had been asked. He only knew suddenly that the man being walked toward the door belonged to this building in a way he himself never would. He stepped sideways out of Richard's line of sight and stayed there. From across the lobby, he caught the eye of a senior concierge near the executive corridor and gave the smallest tilt of his head toward the front desk. The concierge understood something without being told, and quietly picked up an internal phone. The two security officers reached Michael at the same moment. The older one, who carried himself like a former police officer, placed a heavy hand on Michael's upper arm, not roughly, but firmly, the way you guide a person who is about to be removed, whether they cooperate or not. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us. Please collect your things." The other officer reached down for the backpack. Richard, behind the counter, watched with the small, contained satisfaction of a man who believed the situation was now resolved. Michael let himself be turned toward the door. He did not resist. He did not argue. But as the second officer lifted the backpack from the floor, the strap caught against the brass railing of the counter, and the bag swung open at the top. A small leather wallet tumbled out and landed on the marble with a soft, expensive sound. Beside it, a folded photograph slipped free from one of the inner pockets, fluttered once in the lobby's warm air, and came to rest face up between Michael's feet. The photograph was old, edges worn. The image showed two people standing in front of the Carter Grand on what was clearly its opening day decades ago, the same gold scissors visible in the woman's hand that hung in the framed portrait above Jessica's head. The man in the photograph was younger, his hair darker, his smile open, in a way the man in the worn coat had not smiled all evening. But it was unmistakably the same face. The woman beside him was Anna. Michael looked down at the photograph for one long, quiet moment. Then he bent slowly the security officer's hand, still on his arm, and picked it up with the same care he had used to set the bouquet on the counter earlier. He did not show it to anyone. He simply slid it back into the inner pocket of his coat against his chest and straightened. The officer's grip loosened slightly without the man realizing why. Something in Michael's posture had shifted, and the room had begun to feel it. Richard, from behind the counter, raised his voice for the first time. "Get him out! Now!" He had not seen the photograph clearly from where he stood. He only saw a man being slow about leaving, and slowness in his experience was the first sign of trouble. Jessica had set the phone back down on its cradle and was now standing very still, her hand resting flat against the counter, as though she needed it to keep her upright. Several of the recording guests had stopped breathing without noticing. The silver-haired woman by the fireplace had risen halfway out of her chair. The older officer began to walk Michael toward the revolving door. The lobby watched him go. The piano did not resume. From the far end of the lobby, a soft chime announced the arrival of the main elevator, but no one turned to look at it. The marble felt colder under Michael's feet than it had when he walked in. He could see the rain through the glass doors ahead of him, a wall of water waiting in the dark. 3 steps from the door, Michael stopped walking. The officer's hand tightened reflexively on his arm, but Michael did not pull away. He simply stood looking at the door, and then turned his head slowly back toward the lobby. His eyes moved past Richard, past Jessica, past the recording phones and the divided crowd, and settled on the wall behind the front desk, on the photograph hanging there, on Anna. He did not say anything at first. He simply began to walk back toward the counter. The officer, caught off guard, took half a step with him before realizing what was happening and tried to tighten his grip again. Michael lifted his arm gently but firmly out of the man's hand and continued walking. The officer reached for him a second time and then stopped, because something in the way the older man was moving made it suddenly clear that putting hands on him again would be a mistake of a kind the officer did not yet understand. The lobby fell completely silent. The recording phones stayed up, but no one was breathing into them. Michael walked past Richard without looking at him, past Jessica, who had risen halfway from her chair. He stopped directly in front of the counter beneath the framed photograph of his wife and looked up at it for a long, unmoving moment. The chandelier light caught the gold scissors in her hand, caught the curve of her smile, caught everything he had been trying to carry alone for 6 years. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and drew out the worn photograph he had just retrieved. He set it gently on the marble counter beside the lilies, the two images framed and unframed, separated only by the thin glass of the cabinet between them. The same woman in both. The same building behind her. The same gold scissors. And the same man standing beside her decades younger, smiling the way only a husband on the proudest day of his life ever smiles. Jessica stared at the photograph. Her face went through several expressions very quickly, none of them complete. Richard from beside her finally looked. His mouth opened slightly and stayed open. The two security officers, frozen near the revolving door, glanced at each other without knowing what to do. From the elevator, the soft chimes sounded again, and this time the doors opened, and a woman stepped out who had been called down moments earlier by the senior concierge from the executive offices on the upper floor. She was older, dressed in a tailored gray suit, her silver hair pinned back, and the company badge at her lapel read, Margaret Lawson, Director of Operations. She had been with the Carter Grand since before its opening. She had stood behind Anna at the ribbon, cutting in the photograph on the wall. She walked into the lobby, took in the silent room, the lilies, the worn coat, and then looked at the man standing beneath the portrait. Her face changed in a way her staff had never seen it change. Margaret crossed the marble in long, quick steps, stopping a respectful distance from Michael. Her voice, when it came, was clear and carried to every corner of the lobby. "Mr. Carter, welcome home." She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping past Richard and Jessica with a coldness that needed no further words. "I'm so sorry. We had no idea you were coming tonight." The lobby did not move. The recording phone, still raised, captured every face. Jessica's hand found the edge of the counter and held on. Richard's professional polish had drained out of him entirely, leaving behind a man who understood, with sudden and total clarity, that he had just spent the last 20 minutes refusing service to the founder of the building he managed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Margaret Lawson's words hung in the air like a verdict, and the recording phone, still raised, captured the slow collapse of every assumption the room had been built on for the last 20 minutes. Jessica Moore's hand stayed locked on the edge of the counter. Richard Hale's mouth was open, but no sound came out of it. The two security officers near the revolving door had taken half a step back without realizing they had moved. Michael did not raise his voice when he finally spoke. He turned slowly and faced the lobby instead of the counter. His coat was still wet at the shoulders. The lilies were still on the marble browning at their edges. The worn photograph still rested beside them, his younger self and Anna, smiling out at a room that had failed that night to recognize either of them. "My name is Michael Carter," he said, and the calm in his voice carried farther than any shouted announcement would have. "My wife and I opened this hotel together in 1998. Her name was Anna. Tonight would have been her birthday." He looked briefly down at the flowers. "I came here to bring her these, and to spend one quiet night in a building she loved. What I found instead is something I would have rather not known." The silver-haired woman by the fireplace lowered her phone. The young couple near the elevator, who had whispered earlier about people who pushed their way into places they did not belong, did not lift their eyes from the floor. Margaret stood beside Michael, now her posture protective, but she did not interrupt him. She had worked alongside Anna for too many years not to understand what was happening and what needed to happen next. Michael turned finally toward Richard and Jessica. He did not look angry. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the rain or the hour. "Tonight was supposed to be private, a promise I made to my wife before she died. She asked me to make sure this place still treated every person who walked through the door the way she would have treated them. I hoped walking in here tonight that I would not be needed, that she had built something that no longer required watching." His eyes moved to the framed portrait on the wall behind the counter. "She deserved better than what I saw." Margaret turned to face Richard directly. Her voice when she spoke was the voice of a woman who had been carrying something for a long time and had finally been given permission to set it down. "Mr. Hale, You're dismissed, effective immediately. Your access cards will be deactivated within the hour. You will leave the building tonight." She did not raise her tone. She did not need to. Richard opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again, because every camera in the lobby had turned to him, and there was nothing he could say that would not make the recording worse. He walked out from behind the counter without looking at Michael. The two security officers who had come in to remove a stranger now quietly stepped aside to let their former general manager pass. Richard's footsteps echoed across the marble. The revolving door turned once, and he was gone into the same rain he had tried to push Michael into. The lobby did not exhale until the door had stopped spinning. Margaret turned next to Jessica, whose face had gone completely white. "Ms. Moore, you will not be terminated tonight, but you will be relieved of your front desk duties beginning tomorrow morning. You'll be enrolled in a full retraining program at our corporate office, and you will not return to any guest-facing role at the Carter Grand until you've completed it." Her voice softened just slightly, not with sympathy, but with precision. "You're young enough to learn what we expect. Whether you do is up to you." Jessica's eyes filled, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She did not argue. She nodded once slowly and stepped out from behind the counter, and one of the other staff members, a quiet woman from the concierge desk, walked over and gently led her toward the back hallway. The booking screen behind the counter, with its green markers still glowing, sat unattended for the first time in years. No one rushed to fill the chair. Margaret then turned, scanning the lobby, and her eyes landed on the young bellboy still standing near the lounge with his luggage cart. "Ethan, come here, please." Ethan's grip on the cart tightened, and for a second, he looked as though he had been caught doing something wrong, but he walked forward anyway, around the recording phones, around the silent guests, and stopped a respectful distance from Margaret and Michael. "You stepped back when the security officers were called," Margaret said. "You didn't join them. You didn't help them. You stayed where you were, and you watched, and you stayed where you were on purpose. You also made a quiet phone call happen when none of your superiors thought to make one. I want you to know, I noticed." She glanced at Michael, who nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Effective tomorrow, you'll be moved into the front office training track. You'll report directly to me. We'll talk about the rest in the morning." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, and finally just said, "Yes, ma'am," in a voice so quiet only the people closest to him heard it. Michael looked at the young man for a long moment. "Thank you," he said simply. "I saw you too." Ethan's eyes filled, but he kept his shoulders straight, and he stepped back into his place by the cart with a quiet dignity that had been there all along, hidden under the uniform. Margaret turned back to face the rest of the lobby. Her voice carried again this time to every corner of the room, to every recording phone, to every guest who had watched and not stepped forward. "Beginning tomorrow morning, every employee of the Carter Grand, from the front desk to the executive floor, will be enrolled in a new training and conduct program. It will be called the Anna Standard, after the woman who built this hotel and whose name we have failed tonight. It will be mandatory, it will be reviewed annually, and it will be the standard by which every member of this staff is measured for as long as this building stands." The silver-haired woman by the fireplace began to clap slowly, a single pair of hands, that after a moment was joined by the man in the tweed jacket beside her. The applause was quiet and uneven, and it did not last long, but it was enough. Several other guests joined in. The young couple near the elevator did not. Their absence in that moment said everything, and Michael did not look at them. He had already said everything he needed to say. He stepped back to the counter and picked up the worn photograph he had left there. He did not look at Jessica's empty seat. He looked instead at the framed portrait above the key cabinet, at Anna's smile on the day she had cut the ribbon, and he held the older photograph briefly against his chest before sliding it back into the inner pocket of his coat. The lilies stayed on the counter. He looked at them for a long moment. "Margaret." His voice was gentler now, the way it had been at the start of the evening before any of this had begun. "Would you put these in water and place them in the lobby tomorrow, beneath her photograph? That's where she would have wanted them." Margaret's eyes were wet, but she nodded, and she lifted the flowers from the counter with both hands, the way you lift something that matters more than it looks like it should. Michael turned and walked toward the revolving door. The two security officers stepped aside without being asked. The recording phones lowered slowly one by one, as though the people holding them had finally understood that some moments are not meant to be filmed. The pianist, who had been frozen at his bench, did not begin playing again. The lobby remained quiet. At the door, Michael stopped. He turned one last time and looked back at the room. The marble, the chandelier light, the photograph of Anna behind the empty front desk, the young bellboy by the cart, the guests who had spoken up, and the guests who had not. He did not say goodbye to any of them. He simply nodded once the way a man nods when he has finished something he came to do, and he stepped through the revolving door into the rain. He did not stay at the Carter Grand that night. He walked 3 blocks east in the rain and checked into a small, quiet hotel that had no chandeliers and no marble floors, where the receptionist, a tired man near the end of his shift, looked up from his book and smiled and said, "Good evening, sir. Rough night out there. Let's get you a room." Michael smiled for the first time that evening, a small, private smile that no one else saw, and he paid for the room in cash. The story of what happened in the Carter Grand lobby was online within the hour. By morning, it had been viewed several million times. Within a week, the Anna standard had been adopted by every property in the Carter Grand chain, and other companies watching from a distance had begun to ask Margaret Lawson how to build something similar in their own buildings. Jessica Moore completed her retraining program 9 months later and returned to work at a sister property on the West Coast, where she was by all accounts a different employee. Richard Hale was never hired in the hospitality industry again. In the years that followed, the lobby of the Carter Grand changed in small ways that only the longtime staff noticed. The old framed portrait of Anna stayed where it was above the front desk, the gold scissors still catching the light. Below it, every Tuesday morning, a fresh bouquet of white lilies appeared in a small crystal vase, placed there by Ethan Brooks, who had grown into a young man with a clipboard and a nameplate of his own. He never told anyone why he insisted on doing it himself. He did not need to. The people who worked there knew. And the lesson the one Michael Carter had walked into the rain to deliver stayed where he had left it in every quiet corner of every building that bore his wife's standard long after he was gone.